Hello! Over the weekend, the newspaper The Guardian released their lists of best books of the year with this very festive cover, and in that spirit, I thought I would put on one of my festive novelty t-shirts. So, just a girl who loves books and Christmas. And there are a number of different categories for their best books of the year, but I'm just going to focus on the fiction because that's what I'm most interested in. So, I'll give brief descriptions of these, and then if I have any thoughts about them. I've read almost half of these books, so many of them I've made separate complete review videos on, so if you want to know more of my thoughts about them, I'll put links to those in the description below. But why I am so intrigued by this list is because there are 44 books on it, and it was written by journalist Justine Jordan, who is a judge on this year's Booker Prize, and of course the Booker Prize long list only has 13 books. Many of them appear here, but I have to assume that a number of these books were in strong consideration for the Booker Prize. So probably some of them only just missed out on making the long list for that prize. And it's just got me thinking oh, what book almost made the list but didn't quite, and how things would have been so different if some of them had, because there are certainly some of the books on the long list that I would have exchanged for other books that are listed here in this group of books. So I'm going to get into them, but I'd love to know if you have read any of these books or if you're interested in reading any of them now, and what books on this list do you think might have made the Booker Prize long list. So the very first book she talks about is one of the biggest literary publications of the year, which is Sally Rooney's Intermezzo, following two brothers in Ireland who are quite different ages from each other and in very different places in their life, but they're both grieving for their father who has died recently, and they're both struggling with relationships, so it moves back and forth between their perspectives and also to the perspectives of their girlfriends briefly as well, but mainly focusing on them and their very challenging relationship with each other, and really trying to see each other as adults, and how they have a lot of discussions with each other, with their girlfriends, and sort of with themselves, looking at a lot of issues in the world today. And I found this a really moving and meaningful book, and I think it's one of her strongest novels so far, even though Sally Rooney's still a very young writer. Our Evenings by Alan Hollinghurst. I read this quite long novel with my online book club recently, which was such a great experience because it takes a little while for the plot to kick off in this story, and it's somewhat slow to start, so we could really encourage each other to keep reading on. But this is such a tremendous and moving book. It follows the story of a character named Dave Wim, who gets a scholarship to an elite boys' boarding school in the 1960s in England. He comes from a working class background. He has a single mother, and he's mixed race, and he's gay. So it follows the challenges he finds in this education, but also the excitement and pleasure of this experience. And it continues to follow him throughout his life as he becomes an actor. And the way this traces his process of aging and reflection and sort of sorting through his memories of the past is so wonderful. And Hollinghurst is tremendous in creating these scenes that are so carefully composed that you can really see the social and political differences between the characters through their dialogue and interactions with each other. And I just loved this novel. Caledonian Road by Andrew O'Hagan, another very long novel that I also read with my online book club, which was great because there are a lot of characters in this, so much so that there's this cast of characters in the very beginning of the book, which was a very useful thing to keep flipping back to. So if you're listening to the audiobook, you might want to look up this cast of characters so you can keep track of who is who. And this is also looking at England and politics, but in a very concentrated time in the summer of 2021. And central character who's an art historian and celebrity pundit whose life is sort of spiraling out of control, and it follows his connections with many different people from many different levels of society. And so in this way is looking at the nation as a whole and where it was at this point in time in very recent history. And it is quite a drama with so much detail and so many different plot lines going on, but it's really fascinating to follow. And some of them worked better for me than others, and some of the characters I thought were kind of more believable and I connected with more. I mean, the challenge with a big book like this is that there are so many characters that you might want to focus as a reader. You might be, feel more connected to certain characters more than others and would rather read their stories than the other ones. And I definitely felt this with this book, but it is a tremendous story and a really fascinating one. Choice by Neel Mukherjee, a novel that was recently listed for the Goldsmiths Prize. And this is composed of 3 separate narratives that kind of touch upon one another. So there's one about a publisher, one about an academic, and one about a family in rural India and how the choices we make in our individual lives can really touch upon the lives of others in the world that we might not immediately be aware of. So it's about the morality of those choices, but also how we are interconnected in the world today in many different ways. Enlightenment by Sarah Perry, one of the novels that was on the Booker Prize long list, and it's set in a small Baptist community in Essex and follows a man who is a journalist that becomes very interested in the stars and the path of a comet that is currently passing by our world. And it's about his unlikely connection with a younger woman and their strong friendship with each other, but also the difficulties they have in their relationship. And it's about unrequited love. And I thought this was very beautifully written, and there were some elements of the story that I really enjoyed, but I had a slight disconnect with it, and I just didn't fully believe the characters and their relationships. So it wasn't one that I thought was entirely successful. The Echoes by Evie, Wyld. This novel is about a man who doesn't believe in the afterlife until he dies and he becomes a ghost in the apartment of his girlfriend, and he learns things about her life which he didn't realize when he was still living. So it sounds, plot-wise, kind of similar to the movie of Ghost, but less saccharine than that. I think it's more haunting and kind of uneasy sense about sort of mortality and our lives and the complications of love. And I have so enjoyed reading Evie Wyld's fiction in the past. I'm really looking forward to reading this novel. Stone Yard Devotional by Charlotte Wood, a novel that I think was a top contender for this year's Booker Prize and probably came very close to winning it. And I found it such a moving and meditative story about a woman in Australia who completely leaves her life behind to board in a small religious community of women, although she's not religious herself. And I've had some readers ask, does this really focus on religion? And it is kind of about religion, but it's not really about that. It's more about figuring out a way to live and exist in the world, to try to make a useful contribution to it without making a negative impact, and if that is even possible. And so it explores this through her story and her memories of the past, but also her interactions with the people she meets there, and the strange things that occur. There's an infestation of mice here, so if you have a mice phobia, you might want to gird yourself before reading this story. But I think it is absolutely brilliant. The Lost Love Songs of Boysie Singh by Ingrid Persaud, and I am so happy that this novel has been highlighted because I think it is a great book, as well as a really pleasurable and fun reading experience. Although many harrowing things happen in the story, so it's very moving as well. And it focuses on a character named Boysie Singh, who's a kind of gangster in Trinidad. But rather than telling his story from his point of view, it follows four different women who were connected to him in different ways. And so it switches between their points of view and voices, and how it captures their characters and their perspective on the world is so vivid and really alive, and but also it's really enticing seeing their how their lives touch upon one another, and the many dramas that are going on between them and through this central figure, and how this reveals many different layers to Trinidadian society through religion and race and social class and skin color difference, and it's just so it's a novel that's just so alive and lively, and just such a pleasure to read. Rosarita, and it's been quite a while since the great writer Anita Desai has released a novel, and this is quite a slender book, but it's the story of an Indian woman who is traveling through Mexico and feels a sense of independence for one of the first times in her life, but she meets another woman there who claims to have known her mother, and so she's sort of forced to contemplate the past and things she might not have realized about her own family story. Held by Anne Michaels. One of the novels on the Booker Prize shortlist that I just really didn't get on with, as it follows a number of different characters whose lives touch upon one another over many years, and this you have to sort of piece together the many small connections between them, but it starts off in a war and a man who almost dies, and then follows him as he becomes a photographer, and there were elements of the story which I thought had potential and were interesting. There were parts of it which were very beautifully and poetically written, but then there are some kind of philosophical asides which personally to me just felt quite pretentious, and I just wasn't involved enough in it that to want to spend the time to really understand everything about this novel. And I know that there are many connections I probably missed, and moving elements that I didn't quite register for me, because I've heard from other readers who have read and reread it that it gets richer with each reading experience, but I just don't know if I want to invest the time in that. Crooken Seeds by Karen Jennings, a novel that follows a white woman in post-apartheid South Africa, and how her family home is reclaimed by the government and then becomes a scene of a criminal investigation, and how she has to reckon with her family's history in this country and her own personal past. I really enjoyed reading Jennings' previous novel in Ireland, so I've been wanting to read this new book by her. You Are Here by David Nicholls, a novel that follows two characters that are kind of at a crossroads in their life, and then circumstances mean that they go on a walking trip together. So it's about this connection they find with each other, but also reckoning with their own personal pasts. And I've been really wanting to read this book because I've heard that it is absolutely hilarious, but also very moving. The Proof of My Innocence by Jonathan Coe, a novel about a man who's somewhat adrift in his life until he's enticed by a family friend to join in the investigation of some shady dealings of the government. So it's both a kind of thriller, but also looking at the mechanics and workings of power in England today. Long Island Compromise by Taffy, Brodesser-Akner, and this novel follows a Jewish-American family over a number of decades after a very dramatic occurrence, and this is a book that keeps appearing on many of these best books of the year lists, and I hadn't heard about it before, but now I really want to read it. The Unwilding by Marina, Kemp, and this novel is about a fledgling writer who goes to stay with a much more famous writer, and his family and things that occur there and the repercussions of that over the next decades. So I hadn't heard of this book before, but it sounds really interesting. All Fours by Miranda July, a novel which follows an artist in her mid-40s who's moderately famous and who embarks on pursuing her desires to some very strange places. There are some very explicit scenes in this book, and how it shows the way she works through all of the issues that are going on in her life. It's both very funny, but also quite moving in some sections. But I can understand why some readers really wouldn't gel with this story and kind of the tone of its narrative. There was one line in the book that I really connected with, where she writes, "Exercise just seemed like a lot of investment in a temporary body." So there are a number of observations like that, which are just quite like funny, but also how the wackiness of this I just found such a pleasure to just go along with it. Playground by Richard Powers, a novel that follows a number of different characters from around the world and how their lives converge on an island in the South Seas, and how a large corporation has designs to use this island as a launch pad for their schemes. And so how Richard Powers writes about the environment and the emotional complexity of his characters, I think, is really compelling. There were certain characters in this story that worked better than others. For me, I most connected with a Canadian diver in this story that just prefers spending a lot of her time underseas, and some of the descriptions of the undersea world here are so beautiful, but how this story contemplates the coming presence of AI in our lives is so fascinating. James by Percival Everett, the winner of this year's National Book Award and finalist for this year's Booker Prize. I think another probably very strong, almost winner of that prize as well. And I think it deserves many more prizes because it's so tremendous how Everett invokes the adventures of Huckleberry Finn to tell that tale from the character of Jim's perspective, and the many insights and the emotional journey of this story. It's so wonderful. I mean, and Everett, he's just so cool. He's such a cool man. If you listen to him talk, his laid back way, even though he's very prolific, and his satirical style of examining America today, I think is so great. Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner, another novel that I read with my online book club, and that was so interesting because there are many different perspectives and points of view on this very odd book. I mean, it's quite difficult to summarize. It's kind of presented as kind of like a spy caper, as an individual goes undercover in a French eco-commune to kind of try to manipulate some members of this community, and it follows her perspective, her very cold-hearted attempts to change this community and to report on them, but also how she develops a connection with a mentor of this community by reading his emails, and how she becomes so interested in what he's writing about in his perspective on the world and Neanderthal life, and how he thinks the human race has evolved in a way different than it could have. So it explores a lot of different things, and I found it really interesting and very moving and quite fun in some sections. I mean, following this character with all of her pretensions and thinking that she's this great spy when really she is not is a lot of fun in different ways. I don't know if the story entirely hangs all together, but yeah, a very compelling read. Orbital by Samantha Harvey, the winner of this year's Booker Prize, and a story that follows 6 astronauts in a spacecraft that is circling our planet and the observations they make on our world, but also exploring their personal histories and their connections with each other, and how this story so poetically and beautifully examines our place in the world, and giving a very different view on it, I think is so beautiful and meaningful, and a novel that I'm really eager to read again. Long Island by Colm Tóibín, a sequel to his previous novel Brooklyn, and it continues to follow the story of Ailish as she is now living in America with her husband and has a family, and the challenge, a new challenge that she experiences at the very beginning of the book, and how this partly inspires her to go back to Ireland for a period of time and to reconnect with some people there and her community, and there's an appearance by Nora Webster, who also appears in another book. And this is such a rich and involving story that I enjoyed following so much, and I just love his writing. The Women Behind the Door by Roddy Doyle, another literary sequel that continues to follow his character of Paula Spencer later in her life, when she is much more settled, until one day her eldest daughter arrives, and things are not going according to plan in her life. So following their family story as it continues to unfold. Heart, Be at Peace by Donald Ryan, which was recently announced as a finalist in the fiction category of the Nero Book Awards, and this story follows the voices of a number of different characters in a small Irish community that has experienced some economic difficulties, but now there is the prospect of new business for a younger generation, and it's about the clash between the separate generations within this village. Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange, yet another literary sequel, but is also a prequel to his previous novel, There, as it follows a Native American family across generations and time. The Voyage Home by Pat Barker, where the author is continuing to rework Greek mythology from a more feminist point of view, and following the story after the Trojan War as Agamemnon returns home to Queen Clytemnestra alongside Cassandra, and prospects for him are not good. Glyph, which is Ali Smith's pony dystopia novel, which follows a pair of siblings as they are taken out of their home into a kind of safe house, and following their interactions with each other as they're trying to piece together what happened to their mother, and if their mother and her new partner will come back to them, but also their new connection with a horse, and the strange occurrence which are happening around them as lines are being drawn around people's homes and cars and around people to segment them and separate people from each other. And this novel is such a joy to read, and there are so many moving moments and tender connections in this story, but also many troubling and disturbing scenes as well, and I just loved it. The Lodgers by Holly Pester. This is a debut novel about a woman who moves back to her hometown to look after her mother, and her anxiety around this and her current accommodation, but also how she's thinking back to her rented room and the new person that's inhabiting this place. And so this novel is meant to be very poetic and kind of odd, and it has me very intrigued. The Night Alphabet by Joelle Taylor, and this novel is set 2 centuries in the future in London as a woman goes to get a tattoo on one of the few remaining blank spaces on her body, because she's covered in tattoos. And so as she's doing this, she tells the story of behind the many different tattoos that she has. And so I've heard very mixed things about this book. I've heard the author read before, and the way they read and perform their work, I think is so powerful. So I'm very intrigued to get to it, and it makes me wonder if this was like a possible like top contender for the Booker Prize that just didn't quite make it. Spent Light by Laura Pawson, another novel that was a finalist for the Goldsmiths Prize this year, and it follows a woman who is observing the many different objects in her apartment and her personal connection to them, but also how they connect her to the world in a much larger way. It sounds like a really intriguing and unique story. Headshot by Rita Bullwinkle, another Booker Prize longlistee, and one that I was really apprehensive about reading because it's partly about boxing, but it is also about so much more, and it was such a pleasure to read as it follows 8 teenage girls who are involved in a regional boxing competition as they go head to head with one another, but exploring their lives and their pasts and their futures, and how it does this so vividly, showing their kind of coming of age process and coming into themselves, I think is so fascinating. And certainly there are some characters in it that stood out more than others for me and that I remember a lot more, but really distinctive and original. Girl in the Making by Anna Fitzgerald. This is a coming of age story about a girl in 1970s and 80s Dublin, and the complications in her family, and how she negotiates between speaking up and saying the truth, and keeping things to herself. Only Here, Only Now by Tom Newlands. This is a coming-of-age story about a teenage girl in Scotland in the summer of 1994 in a working-class community, and how she grows up with undiagnosed ADHD. This is meant to be a very moving story and in the same kind of vein as Yun Mungo, so I'm very eager to read this. The Pages of the Sea by Anne Hawke. This is about a girl growing up in the Caribbean in the 1960s. Her mother moves to England, and she hopes and expects to be taken there herself, but she's left behind on her island with her remaining family, who she has a very contentious relationship with. Portraits at the Palace of Creativity and Wrecking by Hans Smith. This is a novel about almost daughter who is almost normal, and how she is trying to negotiate between what she really knows and what she thinks she knows, and her encounter with another individual who gives her a very new point of view. So this is a queer story that's meant to be very poetic and powerful and unlike anything else, and has me really interested in trying it. The Borrowed Hills by Scott Preston. This novel is set in rural England during a time when foot and mouth disease was spreading throughout the country, and it follows two shepherds who did have an antagonistic relationship with each other, but who reconcile in the wake of this emergency, and how they focus their efforts upon a wealthy neighboring farm. And it's meant to be told in kind of the vein of like a Western, even though it's set in England and is said to be very lyrical and cinematic. Wild Houses by Colin Barrett, another longlistee for this year's Booker Prize. I probably would have exchanged another book for it, even though I enjoyed reading this story so much. It's a really thrilling tale as well as a really emotional one, as a teenage boy is kidnapped because his older brother owes money to a local gang, and so following this dramatic tale from his point of view and his girlfriend's point of view, and the house the man who owns the house that he is kept in, but also how he explores these characters' inner lives and their workings is so well done. The Safekeep by Yael van der Voden, a debut novel that was a finalist for this year's Booker Prize, and which is also focused on a single location, this time a rural Dutch house, and the two women that inhabit it, and it is so compelling how this story unfolds, and the twists and turns in it, and the revelations that occur as the very complicated relationship between these two women develops, and how it looks at larger histories, I think is so well done, and I enjoyed reading it so much. Going Home by Tom Lamont, a novel that follows a few different characters who have become adults and very established in their lives, but also are negotiating with things that occurred in their childhoods, and how we kind of carry with us this childhood self within us, which has an impact upon our adult life, and negotiating with that. Glorious Exploits by Ferdia Lenin, a novel that's set in 412 BC in Sicily, and follows a couple of potters who engage a number of starving Athenian soldiers who are being held in a quarry to put on a production of Medea. So quite an original story, and I've just started reading this book. There's so much lively dialogue in it that I'm really enjoying, and it's been nominated for and won multiple awards. So it won the Waterstones Debut Fiction Prize, but also just recently it's been nominated for the Nero Book Awards for a debut novel. The Heart in Winter by Kevin Barry, a novel that's set in the late 1800s in Montana, and follows a man and a woman who are very strong-willed and rebellious, and their romance with each other, and how they kind of go on the run in this Bonnie and Clyde style way, but also follows their emotional journey, and the odd people they encounter along the way. I enjoyed reading this so much, because the way that Barry writes is so lyrical, but also he has so much cracking dialogue. Clear by Caris Davies. This novel is set on a remote Scottish island in the 1840s, as a Scottish minister travels there to inform its long-standing resident that he must vacate this island, and it's about their surprising connection to each other, and it is so poetically and powerfully written. Dogs and Monsters by Mark Haddon. This is a collection of 8 stories which invoke Greek mythology, but also contemporary dystopian narratives to explore mortality and love. I've really enjoyed reading Mark Haddon's fiction in the past, so I'd be keen to read some of these tales. She's Always Hungry by Eliza Clark, and this is another collection of short stories that are meant to be surreal and kind of border on horror as they explore contemporary issues. And I love this cover, which is so pretty and pink, until you see the disturbing hand that's creeping out of the bath. And finally, there is a very recently published novel called The Land in Winter by Andrew Miller, which is set in a rural village in 1962, when there is a heavy snowfall and some couples that are confined within their homes because of this extreme weather. It's meant to be a very moving novel, and because it was published so recently, it wasn't eligible for this year's Booker Prize, but maybe we might see it on the list next year. And so I think it'll be great to read at this time of year. So those are all the books in the fiction section, but I want to quickly look at a couple others in different sections. So there's also the best science fiction of the year, which includes The Ministry of Time by Kellyanne Bradley, which I really enjoyed reading. A very inventive kind of science fiction book, which is also kind of a romance, but also looking at a lot of social issues. And it's been a lot of mixed responses to it, of some readers that feel like she was trying to do too much in this story, but I really enjoyed the journey. There's also a section highlighting the best translated fiction. I mean, I don't know why this needs to be put in a different section from the main fiction section, but anyway, I'm very glad that they highlight Bad Habit by Alana S. Portero, which is one of my favorite books that I read this year, which follows the coming-of-age tale of a trans trans woman in working class Madrid, and her emotional journey and the many people she encounters, very very touching encounters and connections she makes, but also a lot of the strife she goes through, and it's a very funny tale as well as a very moving one. Those are just a couple other books on the lists. I'll put a link to all of their best books lists below if you want to explore them more. There's certainly much more from these lists that I want to read, but I would love to hear what you have read from these lists, what you would also recommend, and what you're interested in reading now, and what do you think might have made the Booker list, might have come so close, it might have been like 14th or 15th on the list. So enticing to think about that, isn't it? Or at least it is for me, because I'm incredibly geeky in following book prizes. But I hope you're doing well, enjoying the build up to the festive season, and but still finding some time to read some good things. And I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.